welcome to another chapter of Read Aloud. We are going to be reading chapter 3 of Aurella the Witch. Here is your thinking question for this chapter. In this chapter, Aurella's parents get into a little bit of a disagreement at the dinner table. And I want you to think about who you agree more with, Aurella's mother or her father. And think about why you might agree with that person. You'll see more about what that disagreement is about as we read the chapter. All right, let's get started. Chapter 3. Aurella runs from her problems. Aurella awoke to the sun beating down on her face. The day was nearing its end, and the sun was shining its hardest before it would have to lay down beyond the horizon. Aurella blinked and sat up. She looked down into her hand mirror that lay on the floor. A reminder of the strange nightmare she just had where she magicked herself into looking sick. Her face stared back at her with hair spilling over her shoulders. She looked fine. No bags under her eyes. Her coloring was back to her usual creamy complexion. The incident was obviously just her imagination getting away with her. But it had felt eerily real. The familiar sound of a hammer on metal blared through her open window and jarred Aurella from her thoughts. She quickly slipped on her shoes, slunk down the hallway, and out through the kitchen door. Humming as she walked, Aurella picked up a long stick on the ground and traced designs in the dirt as she went around the back of the house to her father's workshop, a sturdy hodgepodge combination of brick, wood, and metal. It looked like a child began to create a house out of sticks, then got bored and started throwing in any and all materials he found nearby. But, like all her father's creations, it had lasted forever. Aurella crept through the side door to the workshop, her eyes watering and her nostrils filling with smoke. The clinking and clanking of metal sculpting metal forced her to cover her ears. She felt dirt and grime settling on her skin. Now, a natural reaction to entering the forge would probably be something like, "Who stole all the oxygen?" and then running back outside to freedom and air and a longer lifespan without smoke inhalation. But to Aurella, this place was home. She took a moment to pause, close her eyes, breathe it all in, and then she coughed it all out into her elbow. After getting her bearings, Aurella tiptoed up to her filthy father with his singed shirt hems and black hair sticking every which way from the back. He was angrily hammering away at a project she couldn't see. She gripped the long stick she'd found outside and pointed it toward her father, poised for attack. Experience had taught her not to startle a man holding a weapon. But if you did it from a distance... Her father jumped a foot into the air when the end of the stick poked his neck. "Aurella!" Taryn yelled. He turned around and greeted her with an evil grin. "I know I've taught you better than to attack someone holding a deadly weapon with only a stick." Aurella threw the stick and grabbed the nearest sword. "On guard!" she yelled, running at him. Her father's eyebrows shot up in mock fear, and he ran away, comically bumping into tables and knocking over tools. "Joelle, help! There's a little girl in here running around with a sword!" "Don't hide behind your wife," Aurella grinned. "Face me like a man." "Well, if I must." Taryn reached for the nearest sword, his arm shaking melodramatically. "I suppose this is where I meet my doom." He snatched up the sword and threw it into the air. The sword spun 2 revolutions before he caught it in one hand and pointed it at his daughter. "You asked for it." His eyes narrowed and he charged. To anyone watching, this would appear extremely dangerous. A little girl with a sword? A real sword? Fighting a grown man also with a real sword? Are you crazy? But Taryn was an expert swordsman, and he taught his daughter well. Most girls Aurella's age would struggle to lift a blade as heavy as the one she was fighting with, but she was stronger than she appeared, and she held her own. Taryn brought his blade against Aurella's. Feeling fancy, she spun in a circle before swiftly stabbing the space between Taryn's arm and his side. He gasped, clutching his side, and fell to the ground with a moan that sounded like a dying cow. Then he twitched once, twice, 3 times, and shut his eyes. Aurella put her hand on her hip. "You let me win," she accused, pointing at Taryn with her sword. He cracked open one eye. "No, I didn't. I was distracting you." "From what?" "From this." Taryn raised his hand to the pommel of Aurella's sword, gently grabbed her wrist, and twisted it around, and before Aurella knew what had happened, her father was pointing her own sword at her throat. Aurella pouted. "You cheated." "I did not. You just assumed I was dead. You should have stabbed me one more time for good measure. Never assume, Aurella. It could be the death of you. Now help me up." "Oh, so one minute you defeat me in battle, and the next moment you're too old and weak to stand up on your own?" "Smart kid." He winked. Aurella rolled her eyes, grabbed her father's hands, and pulled him up. "You look filthy, by the way," he said. "Better change before your mom finds out you were playing in my forge again." "Good point. And I was sick earlier. If she found out, I'd be confined to my bed for the rest of the night." "You were sick earlier?" Rather than answering the question, Aurella sped past her father, out of the forge and through the front door of their house. She ran to her room and shut the door. Aurella was good at facing her problems that way. Aurella's mother knocked on her bedroom door. "Ella, supper's ready." "Okay, Mom, be right out." She quickly changed into another forest green dress to make it look less obvious that she'd changed. Wiping the smudges off her face with her collar, she ran down the hall to the kitchen. The intoxicating smell of chicken drifted through the house and assaulted Aurella's nose. She took 3 bowls from their creaky cabinet, set them on the worn wooden table, and eagerly sat down at the end of the table. The stool was much too short, but she refused to use the booster from when she was younger. She folded her arms on the table, her chin rested easily against the edge. She felt like a regular human having supper at a giant's house. In her mind's eye, the giant pointed at her and laughed at her puniness. Aurella scowled in annoyance. She was about to comment on the giant's fat head before remembering that it was only her imagination, and bit her lip in embarrassment. Taryn walked into the kitchen, also in clean clothes, and gave Joelle a kiss on the back of her neck while she stirred. "Smells delicious," he grinned. "Chicken and dumplings." "I was talking about you." Joelle smiled and rolled her eyes, then turned her attention back to the food. Taryn smoothly grabbed her waist and spun her around. "I need a proper kiss." All right, Aurella said. "I get it, you love each other, but I'm hungry over here." Taryn stuck his finger into the pot for a taste test. Joelle smacked his hand. "Sit down." She shoved Taryn onto his padded wooden chair, and Aurella eyed with envy. "It's like having 2 children." Joelle served the food, and for a moment there was complete silence, other than the sound of spoons scraping against bowls and the occasional murmur of pleasure. "So Aurella was sick today?" Taryn asked, still chewing his last bite. Aurella wanted to flick a dumpling at his head. Why did he have to bring that up? Her mother already coddled her enough as it was. Joelle nodded, swallowing. "She came home early looking green and nauseated. I sent her straight to bed." She gave Aurella that overly sympathetic look that made her feel like a toddler. "Maybe you should take it easy tonight and go to bed early." "Mom, I'm fine. I'm better now." "You're always fine, Aurella. Nobody is fine all the time, you know. How's it going with those mean girls at school?" Aurella groaned and leaned her forehead on the table. This subject had been worn to death in her household, and Aurella hated being talked about like some child with a problem, even though she was a child with a problem. Well, Joelle prodded. It's the same, Mom, Aurella muttered into the table. Honey, you're supposed to let us know when it happens. Have you talked to your teacher about it? Aurella lifted her head and sighed. Mom, she's an evil old woman who doesn't listen to anybody. Even when she notices it happening, somehow she always blames me. We've talked about homeschooling you, and I'm starting to think it's time. No, Taryn argued. Joelle, if we homeschooled her, then she'll never learn how to deal with bullies. It will only get worse. I'm already aware of your views on the situation, but fighting is never the answer. So you'd rather her be hurt and demeaned than let her fight back? She could duel them, and then they'd know not to mess with her. Taryn, that's incredibly inappropriate. We're talking about little girls here. They don't know how to sword fight like Aurella, and even if they could, someone would get hurt. Taryn sighed and dropped the subject. I know you have good intentions, Joelle told him, but I don't think fighting is the answer. Take Mavic, for example. What about Mavic? Aurella asked. Yeah, what's wrong with Mavic? Taryn repeated. Well, he fights back, but that doesn't stop his bullies from coming back for more. But he always wins, Aurella said. Is it really winning, though, if they just keep coming back? Joelle challenged. Aurella sighed. Can we just stop talking about this, please? No, Ella, we're going to talk about it now. I really don't want to. Well, that's too bad. Mom, please just drop it. The spoon in Joelle's hand fell clattering into her bowl and splashed her with broth. No one spoke. 4 eyes turned on Aurella, who was suddenly stabbed by a piercing headache. Appetite lost, she quietly stood and put her bowl in the sink. Sorry, Mom, she said, looking down in shame. I shouldn't have yelled at you. I'll go to my room. Aurella sighed, picked up the nature book on her nightstand, and sat cross-legged on her bed. As she bent over the book, resting on her lap, her hair spilled over its pages, and she brushed it impatiently behind her ear. She'd always wanted to grow a flower garden and was determined to learn all she could about it. She quickly lost herself in the world of lavenders, roses, and soil. Now, the purpose of going to her room was to be alone, but open windows don't work so well at shutting people out. Hey, witch, you forgot your magic wand, was all she heard before a stick flew through her window toward her face. She barely ducked in time to avoid getting stuck in the eye. She hid beneath the sill, then peeked out the window to see Sasha and one of her sidekicks walking back toward town, giggling. A frustrated growl escaped Aurella's throat, and she kicked her nightstand. In a moment of impetuousness, Aurella ran from her room, out of the house, and across the street, putting as much distance between herself and those girls as possible. Carriage and cart drivers yelled angrily at her for not watching where she was going, but before she knew it, she was already back in the forest. She sat heavily at the edge of the pond and held her knees to her chest. It was twilight and would soon be too dark to be out alone, but Aurella didn't care. Her desperation to be alone overrode logic. Why was her life so difficult? Why was everyone always out to get her? Maybe she was a witch, like everyone said. Maybe she didn't belong here. As she sat alone, her fingers stroked the smooth, oval locket around her neck. She'd never been able to open it, but she knew she'd had it since she was a baby. Her parents had no idea what it held. They had adopted Aurella, and she was wearing it when they found her. Aurella tried once again to open the locket, but it wouldn't budge. It was jammed shut, and no matter how she tried to pry it open, it refused to give way. Open, stupid locket! She shouted. The gold oval front unhinged from the back of the locket, and out fell a tiny piece of parchment. Oh, Aurella uttered in surprise. Thanks. She stared at the locket wide-eyed. With trembling hands, Aurella picked up the small paper and unfolded it. Written on it were the words, Shasta den fiel den retica. Relania eden rota. What the heck? What language was this? What did it mean? And what was it doing in her locket? Maybe it was something important. Maybe it was an explanation for her unpopularity. Maybe saying the words out loud would take her away to a far-off place where people didn't hate her. Or maybe it would make her just like everybody else. Out of sheer desperation, Aurella read the words aloud and pretended that somehow they would magically make everything better. She closed her eyes and held her breath, imagining some big explosion, a change in the weather, or maybe a magical unicorn named Sunshine to ride off into the sunset. But nothing happened. She was still Aurella, still hurting, still alone. That is the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called Mavic Knows Stuff. I wonder what stuff he knows. All right, so reminder, your thinking question today was, do you agree with Aurella's mom or her dad? Her mom is saying, hey, we should homeschool her to keep her away from the bullies. And her dad is saying, no, let's teach her to fight the bullies so they go away. Who do you think is right? Or do you think maybe there's a third solution? This question's kind of similar to the last one, but a little bit different. All right, well, thanks for joining again for another chapter of Aurella the Witch, and I will see you next time. Bye!